witnesses at this formal hearing under oath or affirmation, and witnesses will be subject to federal laws and penalties governing false official statements. Witnesses who are not parties in interest may be advised by their counsel concerning their rights. However, such counsel may not examine or cross-examine other witnesses or otherwise participate in these proceedings. These proceedings are open to the public and to the media. I ask for cooperation of all persons present to minimize any disruptive influence on the proceedings in general and on the witnesses in particular. The members of the press are welcome, and an area has been set aside for use during the proceedings. The news media may question witnesses concerning their testimony that they give after I've released them from these proceedings. I ask that such interviews be conducted outside of the hearing chambers. Since the date of the casualty, the NTSB and Coast Guard have conducted substantial evidence collection activities, and some of that previously collected evidence will be considered during these hearings. Should any person have or believe they have information not brought forward, but which might be of direct significance to this investigation, that person is urged to bring that information to my attention by emailing titan@uscg.mil. I note that we've already received several emails, and we appreciate the public participation. The Coast Guard relies on strong partnerships to execute its missions, and this Marine Board investigation is no exception. The National Transportation Safety Board provided a representative for this hearing. Mr. Marcel Muse, seated to my far right, is the investigator in charge for the NTSB investigation. Mr. Muse, would you like to make a brief opening statement?
Good morning. Again, I'm Marcel Muse. I'm the NTSB's investigator in charge assigned to this accident. The NTSB has joined this hearing to avoid the duplication of facts, which will help develop our report separate from the Coast Guard in the end.
Thank you, Mr. Muse. Before we commence with testimony today, I'd like to clarify and was not otherwise used after 2019. Mr. Nissen referred to that prototype hull in his testimony as Titan Serial 1. After Mr. Nissen left OceanGate, the company manufactured a second carbon fiber hull. That hull was used on Titanic expeditions. Mr. Nissen was not involved with that second Titan hull, which he referred to as Serial 2. I also have 3 corrections to the record from yesterday's factual PowerPoint voiceover, which is Exhibit 001. The PowerPoint presentation is accurate. However, during the voiceover on slide 9, I note that in and around May 2017, University of Washington APL ceased engineering work for OceanGate, but continued to assist the company with 1/3 scale model testing. On slide 11 voiceover, NASA provided more limited services to OceanGate than anticipated due to COVID, and so that was instead of no services after COVID. And on slide 11 voiceover, we specify that certain types of non-destructive testing were not conducted, as acknowledged on the following slide. There was testing at the Deep Ocean Testing Facility on the second hull, and that was non-destructive testing. I will now call our first witness of the day, Mr. David Lockridge, former Director of Marine Operations for OceanGate Incorporated. Lieutenant Steele.
Please stand and raise your right hand. A false statement given to an agency of the United States is punishable by fine and/or imprisonment under 18 U.S.C. 1001. Knowing this, do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? You may be seated.
Good morning, Mr. Lockridge. Whalen, we'll begin with your questioning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Lockridge.
Good morning.
All of my questions will be related to your background and then your experience as the OceanGate and with OceanGate as the Director of Marine Operations.
Sure.
Thank you again for being here. Throughout the morning, we will be taking breaks. If you need a break, please let me know and we will take one.
Thank you.
Before we begin, I will ask you to please refrain from using any acronyms. If you shall use an acronym, I will ask you to stop and then please explain to us what that acronym is.
Understood.
We're going to be breaking your testimony up into three main parts. The first being questions pertaining to your education and employment history. And then we will get into the history with OceanGate to include your roles and responsibilities as the Director of Marine Operations. And then some further questions specifically regarding OceanGate operations. So first, if you could please tell me about your education experience prior to your employment at OceanGate.
Sure. So from school, I joined the Royal Navy. Went in there, signed up in the late 80s, did marine engineering, part-time diver, stayed in the Navy for a few years. Upon leaving, I worked in the electronic manufacturing industry for a few years, and mid-90s converted my Navy diving qualifications over to commercial diving qualifications through HSE. That gave me the ability to do underwater inspection, underwater construction, on and offshore. From there, I also trained and got qualified as an AODC diving systems technician. That's Association of Offshore Diving Contractors. That allowed me to work on air and mixed gas saturation diving systems from chambers, compressors, dive panels, gauges, helmets. After that, whilst continuing to work as commercial diver, I went on and qualified as a IMCA qualified ROV pilot supervisor. From there, I got involved with submarine rescue 23 years ago, and I went on there, started off as a contractor. That was my first introduction to manned submersibles. The company offered me a position. This was with RUMIC, who are now James Fisher Defence, who are still active. And from there, I was trained up. It's roughly a 3-year program to get trained up from hatch operator in the back of the rescue submersible, which allows you to actually assist with the rescuees coming from military submarines at depth, coming into the back of the submersible, potentially at pressure. And then from there progressed up to Pilot 2, which allows you to assist the pilot with all the sonar communications, and you're also responsible for the pressurization of the rescue chamber. If the military submarine has had, for example, a pressure breach, then that would allow us to basically blow down the back of the submersible so that we could equal the pressure in our sub comparable to the military submarine. And then from there, progressed on to dry transfer pilot. That basically allowed you to control, manage, carry out the entire operation. You would be responsible for not only your second pilot, your rescue chamber operator in the back of the sub, but you would also be responsible for all the rescuees that you're bringing out from the military submarine. From there, I went on. I worked for a couple of years in Singapore for James Fisher Defence as well as a submersible pilot on their rescue system, DSAR. I joined MY Octopus, which is a civilian super yacht, and I was responsible for the underwater team on there. We had a 35-ton man sub, a 3,000-metre ROV, and a full diving spread. From there, I decided to do more inspection work, because I did inspection as part of my commercial diving background. That was physically in the water. I decided to advance those qualifications, and I went ahead and I did my CSWIP 3-4U, which is basically a qualification recognised worldwide that allows you to go offshore and run, assist and plan and coordinate underwater inspection projects, whether you are tying in with the ROV superintendent or the saturation or the air diving superintendents on the vessels as well. This allowed us to do inspection of undersea pipelines, platforms, wellheads, anything subsea. The ability to do CSWIP 34U allows you to work, as I said, all over the world. You can do it inshore, offshore, and it's a recognised standard that's recognised globally. From there, I also did some trenching work as part of my ROV background. That basically allows you to, I would go out as supervisor, or I would go out as pilot or tooling tech. From there, that would allow us to actually go out, bring up subsea telecommunications cables that were damaged, fibre optic cables, bring them up to the ship. They would do repairs on them, put them back down, and with the trenching device, we could basically bury these these cables, so that they are protected from any sort of fishing or any sort of hazards on the seabed. From there, it was my wife. My wife saw an advert online for OceanGate. I was working offshore in the North Sea at the time, so when I came back, I said, why not? We'll have a look. I got in touch with them, sent my resume across, ended up getting a phone call from the Chief Operating Officer at the time, Neil McCurdy. We did a phone interview just to see where I was at, what I would be interested in doing for the organisation. The position they were looking for was a Director of Marine Operations. They were looking for somebody that had a background in diving, ROVs, and manned submersibles. Seemed like a good fit. I went across in July. I'll just relate to my notes. I went across in May 2015. And in May 2015, I went across for a couple of weeks to see if the company was a good fit for me. They told me from the outset that the company's plan were to go to the Titanic.
Okay. At this point, Mr. Lockridge,
Yes.
I'm going to ask you to stop.
Of course.
Okay. I'm going to go back a little bit. I don't want to get too far ahead of your training and certifications.
No
We're going to get into your operations with OceanGate here in a second. So how many different types or different submersibles have you piloted?
Quite a few.
Approximation.
7 to 10.
Okay. And did all of those or the majority of those require some type of pilot training program?
Absolutely. Every one of them.
Can you talk to me about those pilot training programs?
Of course. So with the rescue submersibles, as I said previously, it was roughly a 3-year sort of program to actually work your way up. The qualification for that, because it's a very small industry, rescue submersibles. So the American military have got, Singapore, there's various nations. There's approximately 10 to 12 nations throughout the world that have actually got submarine rescue systems. The percentage of the operators for that are civilian. So the manufacturers of those submersibles, they're the ones that lead the training. The training itself has been gathered, and all the information from pilots from a long time ago, from diver lockout pilots that used to work in the North Sea, Gulf of Mexico. The program itself, it's intense. You have to know everything with the submersible. You are dealing with all the classification requirements. You have to know the subs inside and out. So that's the rescue submersibles. In terms of my experience is what carried across to the other submersibles I worked on. Working on the super yacht Octopus, the company that were responsible for, how would I say, oversight, they were the management company that we would deal with regards to any maintenance issues, any training. That was done by DOER, which are based out of California. So I had to go through a training program with them to get certified. They had obviously dealt with the build of the submersible and previous years of the operation on there. When I went, I'll jump ahead post OceanGate, but when I went to go and work for OceanX, I did a 2-week training program. A gentleman called Mark Taylor, very good instructor. We worked together with James Fisher Defence and Rumic long ago, submarine rescue, and he put me through all the training for it's a 3-person submersible. Those are 1,000-metre subs, And he also carried out the training for surface officer, which allowed you to control the deck operations and tie in with the vessels from there. Yes, so most of my experience is with rescue submersibles for foreign navies.
And do you hold any professional merchant mariner credentials?
No. I do have qualifications from when I was in the Navy. Relative to that time, I do have small boat license. I do maintain physical exams, which I always have, done through HSE, offshore oil and gas, ENG1, just to ensure medical ability to actually go in the subs. I have done training courses, but nothing like what you're saying, sir. Yes.
And these physicals,
Yes.
are those requirements for each individual company, or is that a international standard?
It's not an international standard. Some companies do insist, and they will insist you get an ENG1. When I do submarine rescue with James Fisher Defence and Mansub International, I have to have an HSE diving medical, and preferably offshore survival and offshore medical as well, just to cover those bases. Some of the organisations, they don't require any form of medical qualification at all to operate the subs.
And you had mentioned vessel or submersible certification.
Yes.
Of the submersibles that you piloted, were any of those classed to either DNV, Lloyd's, or ABS standard?
Yes, I've worked with the three main agencies. I've worked with ABS, DNV, and Lloyd's as well. The only submersible that wasn't fully classed was Cyclops.
As a submersible operator, how important is it to you to operate a class submersible?
Very. It is paramount. Very important.
And can you tell me why?
The classification agencies give oversight, and it's a third-party verification. They should get involved from proof of concept, just to ensure that what you're wanting to manufacture is within the boundaries of all the rules and regulations that they've gathered extensively over the years, in coordination with the US Coast Guard, with the US Navy, with other militaries throughout the world. It's very important to follow that path and not deviate from it. If the classification agencies themselves, they are willing to be flexible. And if you go to them and you have a suggestion, any sort of modifications that you want to make to the submersible, give them the documentation. They will go away, they will analyse it, they will sit down, they will do boards, they will talk about it. If they find it feasible, they potentially can give you authorisation, even if the vehicle is already classed, to make those modifications.
Have you been part of that classification process?
Yes, I have.
Prior to OceanGate and in the submersibles that you've operated, did any of the submersibles not have a classification other than the Cyclops?
None.
Now I'd like to move into your employment. If you could start, I believe you said it was in 2015.
That's correct. So 2015, as I mentioned, I reached out to OceanGate and spoke to the Chief Operating Officer, Neil McCurdy. We spoke on the phone, seemed like a good fit verbally. I was invited across for a couple of weeks to look over the systems that they already had in place. They had Antipodes, which is fully classed, ABS certified, and still is. They had Cyclops 1. When I went across to Everett to meet with the team and Stockton Rush, the CEO, the intention was Cyclops used to be owned by an organisation in the Azores, which was fully classed. That submersible, when I turned up on site, was not classed. They had made so many modifications to it. The only things they hadn't changed was the hull, the main viewports, the upper viewport, and the hatch assembly. So talking with Stockton, obviously I'm very about class to keep everything prim and proper. The discussion was, at the time, he'd already been in talks, please don't quote me on this, but I'm sure it was with DNV at the time, and the intention was they were going to take the submersible out, do a full dive to 500 meters, which is what the class rating used to be for that submersible, and DNV were going to issue a report stating that they would approve the hull, the acrylic, and the upper hatch, but they would not class any of the other systems on Cyclops 1.
So when you arrived at OceanGate,
Yes.
what position were you hired for?
I was hired for Director of Marine Operations.
And what year was that?
I was taken on as a I was taken on as a contractor at that time to assist them with the organisation of the potential Titan build. So from there, 2015, we spoke. I think it was June 2015, they offered me a contract. That was all going to be pending getting visa approval. As you can tell, I'm from Scotland, so moving over to the US, it would involve immigration authorities. My wife, my daughter and I, we were granted O visa to come in and work in the US, which is extraordinary ability visa. My qualifications and background was sufficient enough with backup from people in the industry to get me across. So we got that in January 2016. That was granted. We sold everything up and we moved across to Seattle, Washington.
And when you arrived to OceanGate at that time, what was the company construct? Who did you report to?
So, being one of the directors, I was immediately responsible to the Chief Operating Officer and the CEO. The Chief Operating Officer at the time was Neil McCurdy, and the CEO was Stockton Rush. That was the two individuals that I would report to directly at that time.
And what was your role and responsibility as the Director of Marine Operations?
Of course. So I shall, and this is from OceanGate website, I hope you have no objections to me reading what my job description is. This is readily available online.
No objections.
Thank you. And this is how the company portrayed me. So, David Lockridge, Director of Marine Operations. As Director of Marine Operations for OceanGate Incorporated, David Lockridge is responsible for ensuring the safety of all crew and clients during submersible and surface operations, for maintaining and operating all marine assets, and for achieving the mission objectives during diverse and challenging submersible expeditions. So, over and above the job title, I was the only, in my eyes, qualified submersible pilot to fly the assets that we had. I was the only one with experience in new build submersibles, dealing with classification agencies. With the two subs that we had at the time, I was responsible for training. So I trained staff-wise, I trained Isabel Johnson, she was one of my trainee pilots, Alexander Russell, and Bonnie Carroll. That was the only three employees of OceanGate that I was responsible for their training. Not one of them got qualified as a pilot that would certify them to take passengers or do solo dives in the sub. Externally to the company, I did training for gentleman Scott Perezinski, who went on to be on the board of OceanGate. Having the only one with experience, I was responsible for all the maintenance. I tied in with APL, the Applied Physics Lab, in terms of the project for Titan, the build that the company got me across to assist, run, and be the chief pilot for. I was responsible for training manuals for Cyclops. Antipodes manuals were already there. They just needed tweaked ever so slightly just to bring them up to date. I would deal with ABS when it came time to do any classification for antipodes. I would carry out the test dives for antipodes with the ABS surveyors, which I did on several times. And anytime we were doing offshore operations, I would liaise with the vessel captain. I would liaise, if it was an internal to US territorial waters, I would liaise with the Coast Guard, port authorities. And in terms of the mission specialists, well, term that loosely, the paying clients, I would meet with them. I was, how I felt, a show pony. I was made by the company to stand up there and do talks. I think it was difficult. I had to go up, do presentations all about my experience. In my eyes, even at the time, they were selling me as part of this project for people to come in, pay money for future investment in Titan, the submersible.
When you arrived at OceanGate, was there a set training plan or procedure for members to become crew or pilots?
None.
Recorder, if I can ask you to please bring up Exhibit 081, which is the OceanGate Pilot and Training Task Book. Mr. Lockridge, have you ever seen this document?
Yes, I have, yes.
Can you please explain the purpose of this document?
The purpose of the document, it tied in with the operations manual for Cyclops and the MS Lars, which was the platform, the dive platform for Cyclops. The pilot training manual itself covered a broad variety of training for the submersible pilots itself. So it provided stability calculations, gas calculations, makeup of the hull, emergency procedures, standard operating procedures. I wrote into this manual as much information as I possibly could. There were things that, unfortunately, senior management, Stockton Rush, Neil McCurdy, I was reined in slightly. There is a lot more I would have put in this manual. The intention for OceanGate, unbeknownst to me when I came across, they wanted to be able to qualify a pilot in a day. Somebody that had never sat in a submersible. They wanted people to basically come in, get checked out as pilots, and be able to take passengers down in the sub. That is a huge red flag. That is a no-no. You don't do that. It's a long process. It's not just a case of sitting down, driving a submersible around. There's a lot more to it. You've got to understand topside operations, weather, limitations on vessels, launch recoveries. There's a lot to cover. And I met resistance with that, but I got into this manual as much as I possibly could to get it approved by senior management, which it did.
In this manual, as it states, manned submersible Cyclops 1.
Yes.
Was this specific to the Cyclops 1?
Correct.
Was there another manual for the Antipodes?
I said there was a manual for Antipodes, yes, that's correct.
And then was there a manual for the Titan?
I never did anything for Titan. As you will hear throughout the day, I was kept away from the project.
Understood. So you had stated that some of you tried to put as much information into this as you could to
That's
include
correct.
topside operations and other things as such. With regard to that, you said that you raised your concerns to OceanGate management.
Oh, for a lot of things. Anytime I'm not, everybody that knows me, they know I can be slightly outspoken. I don't like being bullied into anything. I don't tolerate liars. And if I see something that is a risk, not only to myself, to anybody else, I will put my hand up. And everybody that knows me, I've always been like that from day one, even when I was in the Navy.
So with regards to pilot training,
Yes.
this was it your program, would you say?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. When I came across, Stockton had rough notes that he had. Nothing was, from memory, nothing was printed in his mind what he wanted in terms of a training manual. So long ago. Yeah, as far as I can remember, everything was on me in terms of that training manual for Cyclops 1.
What was Mr. Rush's experience that you know of?
So, I had been led to believe that he was trained, as I said, please don't quote me, a gentleman called Scott Cassell, who's I may be wrong on that, who is a submersible pilot, and Stockton verified that he was qualified by that individual. Since 2009, when the company was set up, he, alongside the contractor Tim Catterson, who was present yesterday, would pretty much do all the dives for Antipodes or Cyclops before I came along.
Can you tell me about the different submersibles that OceanGate had operational when you arrived to the company, specifically the Antipodes and the Cyclops one?
Of course. Antipodes is a 1,200-foot submersible. It's a 5-man submersible, so it'll be a pilot, 4 passengers. It's got acrylic dome either end, so the pilot would actually fly that vehicle from the center section of the sub itself. The sub design was approved long before I came on the go. That submersible, from memory, was initially a diver lockout vehicle from the 70s. I think it's roughly the same age as me. And it got changed under approval by ABS to make it more of a passenger submersible. It had an upper hatch with a tower on it, which would use for egress, ingress of passengers getting in and out the sub, and very basic buoyancy systems on that. It did have emergency systems, full life support system on there as well. The Cyclops 1 was under development, and when I came across during 2015 and at the start of 2016, before they were dismissed by the OceanGate Engineering Department and Stockton Rush, I worked closely with APL, the Applied Physics Lab, Dave Dyer and Mike and the rest of the guys at that team, yes.
You had mentioned earlier that the Cyclops 1 was previously a class submersible.
That's correct.
And when it came to be owned by OceanGate, there was modifications that were made that took it out of class.
Very much so, yes. The entire control system, steering system, propulsion, everything was removed. And I think that is why, when I saw that document in 2015, the approval letter or report from who I think it was, DNV, classing the hull, the acrylic, and the upper hatch, I can see why that is all they would recertify. Fortunately, at that time, we had excellent engineering support from APL. So they provided electrical, electronics, mechanical, and I worked very closely with them until Tony Nissen started.
Okay. And when you, at this point in 2016, when you came in with the company, how far along was the Titan project?
There was nothing. It was a concept. There was no material, nothing had been wound, no material had been fabricated, nothing. It had been made clear to me from the outset I was coming across to assist with the build. My experience working with class was going to be paramount in actually producing a successful product. That was the intent, and yeah, there was nothing at all. APL, everything control systems wise, they were testing things on Cyclops 1, and it was still in its infancy. The amount of dives that we did in that sub, that systems would fail. The MSLRs, the dive platform, there'd be issues with that. Everything at that time, even then, it was experimental, but at the same time, the intention was once everything was finished with Cyclops 1 and the company and APL were happy with everything, Those systems would be fully, not integrated, so they weren't going to get moved from Cyclops, but they would be built hardier, stronger, more reliable, and they were going to get built for Titan. When I moved across, there was nothing. Nothing was produced, nothing was finalized with APL. There was a serious shift in the organization from spring 2016 through to, I would say, summer 2016, where the applied physics lab were phased out. Unfortunately, after the incident on the Doria, I was phased out of the project completely. I was told everything was going to be getting done in-house with Tony Nissen and his team, who I had no confidence in whatsoever, and I seriously voiced my concerns to senior management. That was the Chief Operating Officer, Neil McCurdy, to Stockton Rush, the CEO. I was never happy with any of the decisions that were potentially going into this project. That was pre and post manufacture of what was getting done. I was phased out completely.
And why do you believe you were phased out?
Because I embarrassed the CEO on the Doria wreck. I didn't mean to. Incident on the Doria, it was meant to be my dive. I was meant to take 4 paying clients down to the wreck, and the intention of that entire trip with these mission specialists was we had new sonar fitted to the submersible. We were going to be doing 3D modeling of the wreck. The wreck itself, it's dangerous. We knew it was falling to bits. We did our research, and the plan was I was going to be dropping down over several days, keeping distance from the wreck completely, and basically circumnavigating the wreck at 50 meters away and carrying out sonar scans to create this 3D model of the wreck itself, which, in all good intentions, it was so that divers, future divers, can see exactly what's happening with the decay and degradation of the hull of the Doria itself. It is a very famous vessel, but deadly. I mean, I don't know today, but at the time, I think there was like 18 deaths on the Doria with technical divers diving on it. Unfortunately, the CEO decided that he wanted to take it down. I objected, because I know sometimes he could do things to please himself. He told me I was staying out. I objected again. I was sort of reined in at the time. Just remember, I'm the CEO, you're just an employee. I eventually persuaded him to let me come in on the dive, so we reduced the paying passengers down to 3, and Stockton said he was taking it down. The first attempt that we did when we were on the surface, the MS Lars just got blown away with the currents. We did tell him, he wouldn't listen. The vessel captain was very wary about the currents at the time. I tried to give my input in terms of the weather. It's a very exposed area. So we towed the vehicle so that it was in a good position. Stockton took the helm. The controls for Cyclops, it's actually done at the back of the vehicle. And there is camera systems mounted to I don't know now, but there was camera systems mounted only to the front, just above the acrylic sphere, the forward viewing dome. And you controlled it on the back with, yes, the PlayStation controller. And when we went to do the dive platform was submerged down to its working depth, 12 feet, 15 feet. Took it down so that it's away from the adverse weather conditions. He attempted to take it off. He didn't do it very well. He ended up bending the dive skids on the bottom, the landing skids, which are usually flat, which contained the drop weights. We deployed diver to verify. And anyway, we got the thumbs up. He departed from the MS Lars at depth, came up to the surface, which we usually did, established main communications with the vessel. And from there, he took it down. I kept saying, please keep your distance. Don't tell me what to do. That was the conversation. He decided to go straight for the wreck. He had on sonar, clear sonar image. You could see the wreck, and boom. As I said, it's not very deep. Visibility's not excellent, but it was clear enough. Good ambient light that day, and he came straight down, hard on the bottom. No trimming, no